Everything he knew he learned from Carmen, who taught him without benefit of a translator. To teach someone how to be perfectly quiet, you don't need to speak to them. Everything Mr. Hosokawa needed desperately to know, Carmen taught him over 2 days. He still carried around his notebook, added 10 new vocabulary words to his list every morning, but he struggled against the tide of memorization. For silence, though, he had a gift. He could tell from the approval in Carmen's eyes, from the light touch of her fingers on the back of his hand. She taught him how to get from place to place in the house in plain sight of everyone, and yet no one saw them because she was teaching him to be invisible. It was learning humility, to no longer assume that anyone would notice who you were or where you were going. It wasn't until she began to teach him that Mr. Hosokawa saw Carmen's genius, because her genius was not to be seen. How much harder that would be for a beautiful young girl in a house full of restless men, and yet he found that she drew almost no attention at all. She had managed to pass as a boy, and more impressively, had managed to make herself utterly forgettable after she'd been revealed as a beautiful girl. When Carmen walked through the room without wanting to be seen, she hardly moved the air around her. She didn't sneak. She did not dart to hide behind the piano and then a chair. She walked through the middle of the room, asking for nothing, keeping her head level, making no sound. In fact, she had been teaching him this lesson since the day they were first in the house together, but it was only now that he could understand it.
That was Moni Boyce reading from Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. Hi, bookworms. Welcome to Best Book Ever, the podcast where we talk about your favorite books. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and my guest today is Moni Boyce. Moni is a writer, filmmaker, poet, and author of contemporary and paranormal romance. After working in the film industry for 15 years, helping others bring their visions to life, she now creates characters of her own and brings them to life on the page. She considers herself a bookworm, film buff, foodie, music lover, and an avid world traveler, having visited 33 countries and counting. She lives a nomadic life but considers Los Angeles her hometown. I am so excited that Moni is here today to tell me why Bel Canto is the best book ever. Hi, bookworms. When I recorded this episode with Moni Boyce, our country had just learned about the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. I had not yet heard the name Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd was still alive, which is not to say that there weren't stories just like theirs happening every day. It just means that I was fairly immune to them. When Moni brought up white privilege in Bel Canto, the book we're discussing today, I changed the subject pretty quickly. That was my mistake, and it's one I really regret now. It's only been a month since we recorded this episode, but it feels like it's been years. I spoke with Moni last week about possibly re-recording this episode. She listened to the first draft and we discussed how my questions would be different today. How do we look at books when our culture changes? Does she read this book differently now? Should we all read differently now? Should we reconsider our old favorites? These are challenging and fascinating questions, and they're well worth consideration. With Moni's blessing, however, I've decided to go ahead and release this episode as is, with the acknowledgement that I blew it. I'm sorry I missed the opportunity to talk more about the role of white privilege in Bel Canto, and about how Moni reads it as a black woman versus how I read it as a white woman. Part of my commitment going forward is to not be afraid to ask harder questions, both of myself and my guests, and to lean harder into their stories. I look forward to having Moni on the show again soon. She was a fun and gracious and funny guest, and I want to hear more of what she has to say about everything, honestly. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you visit her Instagram at Moni Boyce. That's at MoniBoyce. Look for the black squares with colored hearts on her main feed, and you'll see that the caption for each one is a list of black authors in all genres. It's a really inspiring list, and you'll find lots of new books to read. A lot of people are posting links to anti-racist nonfiction books, and I think those books are profoundly important to read. But we should never dismiss the power of fiction in a social movement. Studies have shown that people who read fiction are more empathetic, more likely to volunteer, and have better social cognition. Not only that, but you can support authors of color and you get to read a great story. Not a bad deal overall. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding, and thank you for growing with me. Now, back to the show. Hi, Moni.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for bringing this book back into my life.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, I'm so eager to talk to you about this book, and I'm so eager to get into all of it. But before we start, I want to find out how you got to this book. Like, what is your reading life like in general?
Well, at the time I read this, I was working in film and I was a producer, so I was always reading everything I could get my hands on, whether it was books or news articles or what have you, anything that could be turned into a good story, essentially. And I've always been an avid reader ever since I was young. So I forgot even how I stumbled upon Ann Patchett's work, because it wasn't like somebody was like, oh, read her stuff. Um, at this time, I could not recall whether I was just in the bookstore and it looked like a good book, and so I picked it up, or if I'd read about it somewhere and I was like, oh, I'm going to read that. But I read it, and I actually read it in a matter of a few days, because I was just so engrossed in the way that she described this abundance of characters that you came to care about. And I think it's, from one writer to another between you and I, it's like, I know how difficult it is to make a reader care about like so many characters at once. It's hard enough getting them to care about your two protagonists in a romance, let alone and to add to that, now a bunch of terrorists that are in the book. And you come to care about all of these people, and it's so just like hauntingly beautiful by the time you get to the end of the book.
Can you describe the plot of this for our listeners who maybe have never heard of it?
Yes. So Bel Canto is about there's a country in South America somewhere. They're very just like kind of like vague about that. But they were looking for Mr. Osakawa, who is the head of this giant company in Japan, to basically set up shop there so that it can help their economy. They basically host a birthday party for him, and invite all of these ambassadors, bankers from all over the world to come and celebrate his birthday. And the one draw that Mr. Sakawa, for him, that brings him to the country for his birthday, is they have gotten one of his favorite opera singers, Roxanne Koss, to come and sing at his birthday. So while they're all there at the end, basically a terrorist situation happens. Like the lights go out and all of a sudden the place is swarming with terrorists to take them hostage. They want the president of the country, but he stayed home to watch his favorite soap opera. So basically what you think is going to be over in a matter of a few hours or even a day turns into months of the hostages and terrorists living together inside the vice president's mansion. And they become friends. They become to care for one another. These people that have been thrown together in this violent situation, and it's so beautiful because again, you're dealing with people from all these different areas of the world, so everyone doesn't speak the same language. And so that's the other beauty of it, is that many of them are communicating without being able to fully understand each other. And so, of course, by the end of the novel, it inevitably does come to a very tragic end. But it's a beautiful book.
And I found myself, as I was reading it, thinking, of course this appeals to you because you are a travel writer and travel extensively. And that must have had such tremendous joy for you. I mean, though it is a sad situation, all of the people in a room together is the most fascinating dynamic.
It's funny because I read it and I want to say, I forgot the year this came out or whatever, but it was pretty close to, I want to say, the 2012 Olympics that my sister and I went to the 2012 Olympics in London. And there were times because I went back and read this with knowing that we were going to talk, and there were times that I was reading this and it made me think about my experiences of being in London for the Olympics. Because, you're in London, they speak English for the most part. I mean, yeah, there are pockets of, the city where you might hear other languages. But being there at that time, I mean, you could be on the subway and hear like 5 different, languages at any given time because people were there for the Olympics from all over the world. And it gave you that sense of like, we're all here for yes, I might be cheering on America, or you might be cheering on Mexico or Russia or whoever. But it was very interesting to all be there with this kind of singular focus of like, we're here to cheer on these athletes who've worked their butts off, like literally their whole life to compete. And even like sitting in the stadium and just like being there with this collective thing of like, it didn't, because even though it's like, yes, did I want America to win on the times when I saw them, compete in whatever event we were watching, there was still kind of just the sense of awe of like, this is amazing. It doesn't really matter who wins, who gets to be here and see this like incredible, I got to see Usain Bolt run, and that was just like, something I'll never forget. And so it was that sense of like here in the book where it's like you've kind of been thrown together. We don't know each other. Some of us can't understand each other, but it was just this like nice moment of like, we're here and we're together, and it's not about, who's right, who's wrong, who's going to win. It was just this nice sense of togetherness. And that's what I love about this book is that, because I love even the moments where she gets into talking about like how Mr. Hosokawa met Jen, and being in Athens of all places to meet another Japanese person for him that, was amazing. Somebody that he took to heart almost instantly. And that's the beauty. Like, I mean, I know I'm kind of getting off topic of the book, but that is one of the beauties of when you travel is that you meet these amazing, extraordinary people that you might not ever see again in life, but you have this like bond or connection that literally lasts like a lifetime.
It's always intensified when you travel, isn't it? Like it's sort of compressed and becomes very intense.
Yeah.
How many countries have you been to?
33.
Wow.
Trust me, I know people that have been to like double that amount, and I'm jealous.
And were all of these as an adult, or did you travel a lot when you were young with your folks?
There were a few that I hit as a child. My dad was military growing up, so I lived in Germany as a kid. So that I still have like very fond, vivid memories of. And so we did a bit of traveling then, but I definitely started traveling even more as I got older. Just because too, like growing up in a military family, I was used to moving around and not being in like one place. So it was always kind of like this need to like, I've got to go somewhere. I've got to like see something, be somewhere other than here at this point in time. And so that was always, usually for me, especially like working in film, you usually work for so many months on a project. So I would usually take some time and be like, I'm going to go someplace. So me and my sister I'm a twin. So she's usually like my travel buddy. And so we would go someplace, whether it was for a couple of weeks. I remember when we did the Olympics, we were gone for a month. We did a week in London for the Olympics. We hit Ireland, we hit Scotland. And then everybody laughs, but I'm like, we came back here and we hit Wyoming.
Just for the heck of it, or did you have a reason?
It was supposed to be a trip the year before that we'd had to cancel because of work. And so we were like, we'll just tack it on. I was like, the Europeans take a month-long vacation. We're going to do it.
Why not?
Yeah.
That was an aspect of it because as I was reading it in this time that we are living in, this strange quarantine time, I was thinking about the captivity aspect of it. But it didn't occur to me to think about how far away that travel experience is for most of us, and that great feeling of when you go to a big city and you're surrounded by so many different languages. And I love that feeling, that really disconcerting feeling, but also thrilling. And I didn't think about that because, as we're recording this, we've just heard, the Olympics are canceled and sporting events are canceled. And it's going to be a long time till any of us are in that situation where we're surrounded by different faces and different languages. And that's such a shame.
Yeah, I do. That is the one thing for me that because quarantining in itself hasn't been that difficult. As a writer, for me, it's like it took, although in my head, like initially it happened and I was just like, I'm going to be able to write for forever. But you forget like the reason why it's like you have all this free time. but subconsciously you haven't forgotten. So it was a little bit of a struggle at first to maintain even writing. But either way, I didn't have that much of a problem being like, okay, I'm going to quarantine. It'll be, but then it's like, obviously, like you said, as times wore on, it's just kind of like, oh, wow, okay, that trip that I had planned now has to maybe be pushed all the way till next year. And that is kind of the sad part. And I love like seeing people do kind of like the social distancing vacation where like, aquariums and places have made, live feeds available and that kind of thing, which is awesome. But of course, as a traveler, nothing beats like being able to be there, touch, like breathe in the air and, whatever. And so I keep thinking, well, how much sweeter it will be when this is over to be able to experience that again.
Yes. So what was it like for you to reread this book during quarantine times? Because for me, this was my second time reading it, and it was a completely different experience.
No, what's funny about it, it was a completely different experience for me too, because in my head I was like, why don't I remember that from before? And I part of it, I chalk it up to being older and maybe being able to pick up on things I maybe initially missed before, because part of, like, I know reading the Roxanne character, for instance, like reading as when the novel first starts, I'd say for like maybe the first like third of the book, I'm like, I don't really like her. She seems kind of like, for lack of a better word, just very like arrogant, or I should say, no, for a better word, we'll say privileged. She's been a very, world famous opera singer. She's used to people catering to her. I think about the scene where, they're letting all the women and children go, and she's like almost out the door. And then the guy's like, no, you're going to, General, I forgot which one of the generals, like, is telling her that she's going to stay. And she totally, does that whole kind of like diva, I've done all the things, I'm going to walk out of here. She goes to walk and he literally snatches her by her hair. And I'm like, that is only privilege that would let you mouth off to a guy with a gun. Yeah. And I was like, in my head, I was thinking like, in a real life situation, I was like, that could have got yourself killed or other people killed for your like disobedience. And in that moment, I didn't like her because she was so just kind of like, I'm the opera singer, you're going to let me go. And it was just kind of like, ugh. And I didn't remember having those feelings toward her when I initially read the book. And I don't know if it's just given everything like that's in the news or different things like that we deal with, that we're just like, really, I need you to take one for the team. If they need to hold, they could have been like, no, everybody back in the house. And so there was moments at the beginning where I did not care for her character.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough thing to read in these days of, Ahmaud Arbery was just shot, and like, it is kind of incredible to read that white woman privilege of, there's even a line in there, nobody would shoot a soprano, which made me laugh out loud. Your mouth kind of drops open at that. Like, really, honey? It's so nice to be you.
Yeah, exactly. I know that's so funny that you said that, because I remember reading that line and going like, oh God, like that's horrible. That's like when those actors say, do you know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I really thought about the time. I loved the portrayal of time in this. Mr. Hosokawa, he can't speak to her, Roxanne, the opera singer, but now he's in captivity with her and he's listening to her sing every day. And there's this line where he says he could never completely shake what he knew to be the truth, that every night they were together could be seen as a miracle for 100 different reasons, not the least of which was that at some point these days would be ended for them. He understood that these were extraordinary times, and if their old life was ever restored to them, nothing would be the same. And it seemed like so perfect for this moment that we're in, where we're in this weird, flattened out time in captivity, all of us, this sort of constant present, and yet at the same time kind of looking at each other like you're quarantined with your family. How long has it been since you've been with your family for this long? It's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, it's like, because I actually quarantined myself pretty early. March 9th. I remember the day because I'd literally just been at an RWA, like a Virginia RWA meeting, like the day before. It was like, 10, 12 of us, like not a care in the world. And then literally, like the next day, on the news, they're talking about how this is growing in like New York and wherever. And like, be careful who you're around, because at that time, too, it was a lot of people that had traveled like either outside the country that were coming back and now had it. And so,
Hmm.
of course, I was like in my head, like, oh my God, I was just in a room with like 12 other people. I don't know who's been. And, I'm kind of like Northern Virginia. So we're pretty close to like some of the areas that they were like, especially this area where a lot of people are like either military or they travel for work and things like that. So I was really terrified because I was like, we went to not even just the meeting, we went to a restaurant and sat and ate and,
Hmm.
and all of these things. And so all I could think about was like, oh my God, like I have asthma. Like what happens if I get this and I can't shake it, or I'm not like asymptomatic and like, just have the virus, but, not any of the symptoms. And so I was just like, I'm going to lock myself away. And I'm not coming out until they like literally say it's okay. And so, like you said, like reading the novel, like I totally forgotten like that they were in captivity so long in terms of that the hostage situation like it stretched on for months. And I was like, wow, it's kind of interesting that I would have chosen this book given that we're kind of in our own. I wouldn't go so far as to call it like a hostage situation or anything like
No.
that, but having to stay, in one place for such a long amount of time. And, I told you earlier, I was quarantining with my parents right now, so I wasn't by myself. And what's interesting is that, when you're older and it kind of being here with them is kind of given me a chance to learn my parents as people, I guess you could say, and not just, like mom and dad. I mean, I've always had a pretty decent relationship with them, but like now having all of this time where it's just like we're just here in the house. Like if I'm not writing, then usually like we're doing something. I might go for a walk with my mom, or my dad and I love TV, so sometimes we sit and we watch and we have a conversation, and like, and so it's nice to kind of be like, and we've gotten into these stories about like things that happen to them, pre being parents and husband and wife and those kinds of things, and that's always nice to get to learn about your family more so than what you knew before. And that's actually kind of what I like. I keep hearing these stories even from my other friends who have kids, and it's like, oh, we're baking bread together and we're doing all of these things that usually you don't have time for. Usually we're always like, oh, I'll do that another time. Oh, we'll get to that. We've got to run here. We've got to do this. It's always like the crazy schedules. And now everybody's kind of like, oh, we did something today that we've never done before. I sat here and I painted, or I read a whole book in an afternoon.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice.
Yeah, there is definitely a sweetness to it. And that was what I was noticing as I was reading the book, is that she was really captured that sweetness that sort of comes with difficult times. And I was really careful in my head not to equate the situations, because I fully understand there is nobody with a machine gun at my front door not letting me out of the house. I get that it's not the same thing, but it is a similar way in that, our options have been taken away from us if we want to stay healthy. And and as distressing as what's going on outside my door is, there is definitely a sweetness to this time that I did not stop and appreciate before. This time with my family, or time with art, which is another thing that I love so much. When the way the entire book changes when the hostage negotiator brings in a box full of sheet music, so that Roxanne, didn't you love that as an artist? You
Uh,
must have just,
yeah, because there's something about that. And I think that, and it's funny because even when I worked in film, like sometimes you would get people that would be kind of snarky about it, like, oh, it's not like you're curing cancer or whatever. And, and I was like, not that I beg to differ, because obviously, like, no, we're not curing cancer. But from someone who knows what art can do to heal and to, not only the because it's like, I hear stories all the time where people are like, this person's music helped me through a really rough period. That film made me see something different. And I loved that in her book, it was art that kind of brought them together. You see, like, the young kid Caesar, who starts being taught by Roxanne, like, how to, sing opera, and he has a really great voice. And I love it because it's, again, just another thing besides just the close proximity. It's this thing that kind of draws all of them together. They sit in the mornings and they listen to Roxanne sing. And it's just such a beautiful, like, the imagery in my head, like, I'm just like, oh my God, that's just like a gorgeous thing you have. And I mean, at this point in time, it's like 3 women and like all of these men. So it's like all of these men with guns are in such awe of, like, her singing and listening to that. And it's like this peace that kind of descends when she does. And so I loved that moment of, like you said, him bringing the sheet music, and it just kind of transformed that whole situation a little bit.
And it had to be opera. I couldn't think of anything else, any other artist she could have been in that situation to bring that kind of joy, because it had to be something that basically nobody understood, except for Mr. Hosokawa. But they all had all these different languages. So all they heard was the music of it and the sound of her voice, and they weren't really knowing what the words of it were. And I thought that was just so perfect and so wonderful that the art itself is what drew them in. It wasn't like, oh, this is my favorite one because it's about this uprising in my country, or anything. It was nothing like that. It was purely the art that brought them all together as a group. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, I loved that. And that's what, because I mean, I think a lot of times we get so caught up in each other's differences that we don't always stop to think about the things that do make the commonalities that we have, the similarities. And then that's one of the things I love. It's like, I've always been a huge fan of, like, movies and TV and that kind of thing, but I adore music, and I love, like, literally all types. And I can remember being like 8 years old, and I don't know if you remember, they used to bring operas on, like, I want to say it was like PBS or some of those, like, local channels or whatever, and you could, like, literally watch them. And it was funny because the rest of my family would be like, why are you watching this? But you really can't. I mean, I can remember being an 8-year-old kid, and I thought it was beautiful. I had no idea what the woman was singing about, but from time to time, I can remember I would, like, click onto these stations, and I would just, like, watch and, like, listen and be, like, kind of enthralled of, like, this is gorgeous, and how does she get her voice to go that high?
Yeah. Do you listen to opera now?
Some, not as much as then. I think there was, like, a purity in it then, and now I'm a little like, like, I'd like to kind of know. I'm like, I want to know the story.
Yeah, right.
The story first, I get caught up in what exactly is being said here. So I kind of lost a little bit of that. Like, I've attended, like, 1 or 2, and that was nice. I loved, like, being there in the presence of it. I think for me, opera is one of those things where I like going and having, like, the full experience. The just sitting and listening to it now, I'm like, I enjoy classical, but to me, they're 2 different things. So yeah, for an opera, it's like I want to get immersed in the actual, like, let me go and, like, watch it, like, play out on the stage as well as getting the music. So yeah, not so much anymore. But like I said, I can remember as a kid being very just like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, entrancing. I don't know anything about opera, and I've always wanted to, because it always happens that way in the movies. I'm thinking of Moonstruck and what else? Pretty Woman, where they don't know the language and all of a sudden they're weeping. And I've met people who love opera who insist that they weep while they're at the opera, which is amazing. But I wouldn't even know where to start.
When I see people try to spiritual, you get the people like, oh, I don't listen to music, or I don't do this. And I'm like, you must have a sad life. Because how could you not want art in your life? I mean, it's what makes, I mean, I can't think of how many conversations have, like, gotten started or gone on to, like, the wee hours of the morning that didn't relate to some type of art.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Well, and I thought that was a real genius that Ann Patchett does in this book, too, because even though I don't know anything about opera, I felt like I did. as
Yes.
she described, and she didn't say, you know, this is her singing Carmen, because that wouldn't have meant anything to me, but she describes, you know, how the tenor of the room changes when she sings this or that and what it sounded like. And I thought that was an incredible feat, because it feels like
Yes.
you listen to an opera after you've read this.
Yeah,
What I
no, I totally
assume it feels like.
yeah, I loved the way that she wrote that because, like you said, it gave you a sense of, or not even that I understood it more, but being able to kind of understand it or appreciate it the way that these characters did. Because even when the vice president's, like, was it his sister or aunt or whatever, was trying to ask if, you know, the father could come and listen, you know, at one point she's like, even if he has to, you know, sit in the kitchen or the garden. And I'm like, wow, he must really love it. If even if I could listen from outside, I would be happy. It's like, you know, to
Yes.
have something that you would feel that way about, that even if I could just like have a crumb of whatever it is, I would be satisfied.
Yes. Be that close to the greatness. And that was a neat thing also, that I believe it was the priest who said, a voice like that could only come from God. So being
Yeah.
near her was a godlike experience. Like he was
Yeah.
reconciled to this. There's nothing else in this except God, because her voice is so extraordinary. The priest was one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Every single one of the characters, really, they're so well drawn.
It's so full of, it's almost like a character study, her book, because there's so much.
Yes.
I mean, without that, I think it would just be like another story that I would have passed right by. But she gets so into the characters' minds and what they're feeling and thinking, that that's what really, to me, sustains the book, is that you are living every moment, every breath through what is going on with these characters.
Have you read other Ann Patchett?
Yes, I've read a couple of other ones. What was it? The Patron Saint of Liars. I've read that one. Okay, so yeah, Run and Taft are the two other ones besides Patron
Oh,
Saint of Liars.
I forgot about Run. Oh my God, that one's so good.
Yeah, so it's funny because now I feel like I want to go back and read her work and familiarize myself with some of her other books, or even just get some of the newer ones or whatever. Yeah, no, I mean, I love her writing because it's so just like sucks you into the story and almost makes you feel like you're like a fly on the wall, or like there in, you know, the room or whatever's happening, that you're like seeing it like firsthand. And I love that. So immersive.
I have read several of her books, and this one is my favorite, which is saying a lot because I haven't disliked any of her books. And this one is one that makes me angry. It's so friggin' good.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
I slammed it a few times as I was reading it. Like I can't, I will never be able to do this. This is
Yeah.
incredible how subtly she can create like this. It's just breathtaking. Oh, it makes me so angry, but I'm also so grateful I get to read it.
Yes, no, I know. I have a couple of writers. Sometimes it's like you read their work and you're like, man, I want to be able to write like this.
She owns a bookstore. Did you know that? I
No, I did not. Where's it
I
at?
I think Nashville.
No
I'm not.
way.
I think I might be wrong about that, but I think so.
Oh, I'm so gonna look that up because if I'm ever down
Yeah.
that way, I definitely want to hit that up.
So Moni, what are you reading right now? Are you in the middle of anything?
I am actually in the middle of two different things. It's funny because I'm, besides reading a lot of romance, I'm also a huge like mystery thriller. Like I love those kinds of books.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now I'm in the middle of reading Rachel Caine's fourth book in the this one's Bitter Falls. I can't remember the series name, but it's so great because like I feel like obviously there's tons of male protagonists in the mystery thriller, you know, world. And so it's so great to get this book written by a woman about a woman who she starts out in the first book, because there's been four at this point. She starts out in the first book literally the wife of a serial killer, and she didn't know he was a serial killer. And so already right there, she had me. I was just like, this is interesting. I've never, you know, haven't had a character or this premise before. And she just writes it so well, and so the way it's almost kind of like Ann Patchett in the way she gets into the heads and minds of this character, that it's almost like being the parent of a kid who walked into who's like the school shooter almost. So here this woman is who's like hated and vilified by the world because of what her husband did. And so she's kind of on the run with her kids and trying to, even now it's like years later after the trial and he's sitting in jail and she's still kind of being hunted by this mob that thinks that she had something to do with it because she was married to him. And so, they're kind of like, now she's kind of living this, it's like before where she was the unknowing, kind of housewife where you're just like, a little bit, you're kind of like, how did you not know? I've never been so tense reading a book before in my life. It was literally like, I would stop reading for a little while. It's just like my body could finally just like, let me like take a second. But she's so good. And it's funny because she writes completely other genres. I think she writes like paranormal romance or something like that, which I haven't read any of that. But I have been totally like, every time I saw that it was like the next book was coming out, I was like, one click.
Yeah. I've never even heard of her. That's so fantastic because those are the best books when you have that full body reaction.
Yes. So usually I read like one fiction and nonfiction at a time. So my other book I'm kind of reading while I'm reading that is one of Joanna Penn's books.
Oh, yeah.
Basically how to be an authorpreneur because I tried, I'm like, I want a little education and to be entertained. So I usually try to like do either or at the same time. So
yeah. Keep both sides of the brain working.
Yes.
Well, will you tell our listeners how they can find you?
So you can find me on my website, moniboyce.com. I'm on those spell. It's MONI. Last name is BOYCE.com. I'm also on social media. Most of my social media handles are my name. So if you're on Twitter, Instagram, even Pinterest, it's at Moni Boyce.
Moni, this has been such a delight talking to you. I'm so glad we finally got to do this, and I'm so grateful you got me to read this book again. Was just a joy to read.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, and it was so great to talk to you about it. That's always the great thing is talking about art with other people who enjoy it just as much as you do.
Thanks for listening, book nerds. For more information on this episode and links to all the books we discussed, please go to our website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, or follow the podcast on Instagram at bestbookever. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and you can find me everywhere as Julie Wrote a Book. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it on social media and leave a review on whatever podcatcher you use. Reviews really help our visibility to new listeners, and we are grateful for every one. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.